It was one of those warm afternoons that made everything feel slower than usual. The sun hung low enough to soften the light, but still bright enough to keep the day alive. On this particular afternoon, a teenager named Daniel was walking home after finishing basketball practice at the community center. He carried his backpack over one shoulder and dribbled a worn-out basketball with the other hand. Not because he needed to, but because it helped him think. Daniel wasn't in a rush. He liked taking his time on days like this. The air felt easy, and the neighborhood felt familiar. He passed the corner bakery, where the smell of sweet bread drifted through the open doorway. He waved at an older man sitting on his porch, a man he'd seen many times but never actually spoken to. The man raised his hand back with a tired smile, and Daniel kept walking. His throat was dry from practice. So he decided to stop by the small convenience store near the bus stop. The store wasn't fancy, but it always had cold drinks and friendly employees. As he pushed the door open, a little bell chimed, the same bell that had sounded for years. Inside, the air conditioning felt like a breath of relief. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead and walked straight to the cooler where the drinks were lined up in neat rows. He picked his usual Lan iced tea and then went to the counter. The cashier, a middle-aged man with glasses and a tired expression, nodded at him. "Good practice today?" he asked. Daniel smiled. "Yeah. Coach pushed us harder than usual." "That's good," the cashier replied. "Hard work pays off." Daniel paid for the drink, thanked him, and stepped back outside. He didn't know that while he was inside, someone passing by had noticed him. This person, who didn't know Daniel at all, had been nervous, already jittery, looking around, imagining problems where there weren't any. They saw a teenage boy in athletic clothes walking around the store area and, for reasons only they understood, convinced themselves something looked wrong, so they made a call. A brief call, a vague one. A call saying there was a suspicious teen hanging around the store. That was all. No real details, just an uneasy feeling turned into a report. Daniel had no idea. He walked out, sipping his iced tea, letting the cool sweetness settle the dryness in his throat. He paused near the bus stop sign and leaned against it, checking a message from a friend, asking if he wanted to join an online game later that night. He started typing back, slowly, because Daniel always typed slowly. The world around him felt normal. Cars rolled by. A woman pushed a stroller down the sidewalk. A dog barked from behind a fence. Everything blended into the usual sounds of the neighborhood. But a few blocks away, 2 officers were responding to that vague call. They weren't angry, and they weren't expecting trouble. They just had a description: rough height, roughly the location, and the report of someone acting suspicious. That kind of report didn't say much. But protocol meant they had to check it out. Daniel didn't see the police car at first. He was busy unscrewing the cap to finish the rest of his drink. The car rolled closer and eventually stopped near the curb. The engine's hum broke the quiet rhythm of the street. He looked up, confused for a second, but not worried. Police cars passed by all the time. He figured they were stopping for some reason, unrelated to him. He didn't move, just stood there holding his bottle. One of the officers stepped out. He looked around before walking toward Daniel. His expression wasn't harsh, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the look of someone trying to figure something out. Daniel lowered his drink and waited, unsure if he should say something first. He wasn't used to talking to police officers, so he decided staying still was best. "Hey there," the officer said, stopping a few feet away. "Can we talk to you for a moment?" Daniel blinked. "Me?" "Yeah," the officer replied. "Just a quick conversation." Daniel nodded, but his heart sped up a little. Not because he had done anything wrong, he knew he hadn't, but because the situation felt sudden, unexpected, strange. The second officer stepped out of the car too, closing the door gently before joining the first. The two stood facing Daniel, watching him carefully. He felt their eyes on him like, "Wait, what's going on?" Daniel asked, trying to sound calm. "We got a call about someone matching your description in this area," the first officer said. "Just need to make sure everything's okay." Daniel's eyebrows pulled together. "I just came from practice. I'm waiting for the bus." The officers exchanged a quick glance. Not a suspicious one, just a thoughtful one, as if they were trying to piece things together. The problem was vague calls created vague encounters, and vague encounters left too much room for confusion. Daniel shifted slightly, adjusting his backpack, and one of the officers tensed. Not aggressively, just a natural reaction, like someone bracing themselves when a door slams unexpectedly. But Daniel noticed it, and suddenly he felt nervous too. He didn't know what the right thing to do was. Should he put his hands up? Should he keep them down? Should he explain more? Should he stay silent? He took a breath, trying to steady himself. "I'm not doing anything," he said gently. "I was just buying a drink." He held up the iced tea bottle as if it were proof. His voice wasn't shaky, but it wasn't fully steady either. The officers noticed this. They also noticed the basketball under his arm, backpack strap digging into his shoulder, the sweat still drying on his forehead. Nothing about him seemed dangerous, but they still had a call to check. "We understand," the first officer replied. "We just need to ask a couple questions." Daniel nodded again, though he felt his pulse thumping harder. He didn't like being questioned in public. A couple people passing by slowed down, watching. That made him more uncomfortable. The officers asked where he lived, where he was headed, what he had been doing earlier. Daniel answered all of it honestly, though he wished he didn't have to. He wasn't a troublemaker. He had never even been in detention at school. But the conversation didn't feel smooth. It felt stiff, awkward, edged with misunderstanding. Every time Daniel moved slightly, the officers stiffened again. Every time they rephrased a question, he wondered if he had somehow said the wrong thing. He shifted his basketball from one arm to the other, and one officer instinctively stepped back. Daniel froze the moment he noticed. "Sorry," he said quickly. "My arm was getting tired." "It's okay," the officer replied, though his tone was flat, cautious. The little mistakes in communication added up. The tension wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and slow, like an invisible rope slowly tightening without anyone meaning for it to. Daniel tried to stay respectful. He answered everything, stayed still, breathed slowly, even though a knot of worry formed in his stomach. He wondered if someone had mistaken him for someone else. He wondered why the officers didn't seem convinced by his calm explanations. It was the kind of moment where a small misunderstanding could grow into something much bigger if someone didn't step in soon. Daniel looked around, hoping maybe someone from the store would come outside and recognize him, or maybe the bus would arrive so he could leave once the officers cleared things up. He just wanted the moment to be over, but it wasn't over yet. And as he stood there in the quiet tension of that warm afternoon, he didn't realize everything was about to shift because someone who cared deeply about him was on the way, racing toward the scene after hearing something that made their heart drop. The moment felt longer than it should have. Daniel stood near the bus stop, holding his half-empty drink, trying to keep his breathing steady while the two officers continued asking questions. The warm afternoon that had felt peaceful earlier now felt heavy, like the air had thickened around him. He wished he could just disappear, slip out of the moment, or rewind time to 5 minutes earlier when things were simple. The officers weren't raising their voices or acting harsh, but something about the whole situation felt wrong. It wasn't what they were doing, it was what Daniel felt. Something inside him said, "This shouldn't be happening." Even though he kept telling himself to stay calm, a bus drove by across the street, splashing a burst of air that made a few leaves roll along the pavement. Daniel watched it go, wishing it were the one he was waiting for. If it had been his bus, maybe all this would already be over, but the officers stayed where they were. One of them spoke again, asking Daniel if he had been hanging around the store for a long time. Daniel explained everything again. He had just bought a drink, he had just finished practice, he was heading home. He showed his iced tea bottle as though it were some kind of proof that he was harmless. The first officer nodded slowly, but his expression didn't change much. He was trying to piece things together, but he didn't have much to work with. The vague call they had received didn't give details, just a basic description, one that could apply to a lot of people in the area. A couple of teenagers walked past on the other side of the street, glancing at the scene with curious faces. Daniel felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. He didn't like being looked at this way, like he was part of something bad. Even though he knew he hadn't done anything, The second officer spoke suddenly. "Do you have anything in your backpack?" Daniel froze for a second, confused. His backpack wasn't heavy, just some clothes, a notebook, his practice jersey, and a snack he hadn't eaten yet. "Just my stuff from practice," he answered. "Can you take it off for a moment?" the officer asked. Daniel hesitated. Not because he didn't want to cooperate, he did. He just wasn't sure how to move without making them nervous. He didn't want to make a mistake. He didn't want to add tension to a situation that already felt too tight. "Okay," he said quietly. He slowly slipped the backpack off one shoulder, then the other, placing it gently on the ground. The officers watched closely. Daniel could see them paying attention to every small movement, and it made him even more self-conscious. "You mind opening it?" the first officer asked. Daniel bent down, unzipping it carefully. Inside, everything was exactly what he had said. His jersey still smelled faintly like the gym, and his notebook was bent at the corner from being shoved into the bag too fast. The officers didn't touch anything. They simply leaned a little closer to look, then stepped back. They weren't trying to intimidate him, but the process still made Daniel's nerves jump. He zipped the bag closed and stood up again. "That's all I have," he said. The officers nodded again, but they didn't walk away. They exchanged a quiet conversation between themselves. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could tell they were unsure of their next step. A gentle breeze moved through the street, rustling a few pieces of trash near the curb. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. People kept walking by, some glancing for a moment, others pretending not to notice anything at all. Daniel tried to look relaxed. He tried to look like everything was fine. He didn't want anyone thinking he was involved in trouble. But inside, he felt the growing discomfort of being misunderstood. As the officers continued talking quietly, Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. He didn't move at all. He didn't want to make a mistake. The officers noticed the buzzing, but didn't comment. After a few seconds, one officer turned back to him. "We're not saying you did anything wrong," he said. "We're just trying to understand the situation." Daniel nodded. He understood that they had a job to do, but he wished his day hadn't been caught in the middle of someone else's fear or misunderstanding. "Did you see anyone else hanging around the store before you went in?" the officer asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, just me and the cashier. And a woman who came in behind me." "He didn't talk to anyone outside?" the officer asked again. He felt a small knot form in his stomach. Why were they repeating things? Why did it feel like they weren't hearing him the first time? "No," he answered softly. "I didn't talk to anyone. I was just getting a drink." The officers thought for a moment. Daniel wished he could read their minds. He wished he knew when they would decide they were done and let him go home. His thoughts were interrupted when a voice called from down the street. "Everything all right here?" Daniel turned his head slightly and saw the cashier from the convenience store walking toward them. The man must have seen the officers outside through the window or noticed that Daniel hadn't left the area yet. The cashier reached them with a curious but calm look. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The officers looked at each other, then one of them explained. "We got a call about someone looking suspicious near the store. Just checking in." The cashier raised his eyebrows and glanced at Daniel. "Suspicious? Him? He just bought a drink." Daniel felt a small wave of relief wash over him. Finally, someone else who knew the truth. "Yeah," the cashier continued. "He comes in here all the time. Never causes any trouble. Just buys something and heads out. He didn't even stay long today." The officers listened carefully. It was the first solid piece of information they had since arriving. "So you didn't notice anything unusual?" the first officer asked. "Not at all," the cashier replied. "Everything was normal. It seemed to help." The officers visibly relaxed, though only a little. They had to be cautious, they were trained that way, but the cashier's words clearly made them rethink the entire situation. "Thanks," one of the officers said to the cashier. The man nodded and stepped back toward the store, giving Daniel a small, reassuring look as he left. Daniel let out a quiet breath once the cashier walked away. He felt like a tiny bit of pressure had been lifted, but not enough to ease all the tension. The officers looked at Daniel again. Their expressions had softened, but were still focused. "Let's listen," the first officer said. "We're just trying to confirm what's going on. You matched the description we got, but it looks like everything might just be a misunderstanding." Daniel nodded, though his chest still felt tight. "I told you I wasn't doing anything, you understand," the second officer replied. "And we're not saying you were. Sometimes calls come in that turn out to be nothing." Daniel swallowed. He didn't say anything. He just wanted the conversation to end. The officers took a step back, as though preparing to wrap things up. But before they could, another person walked closer. Neighbor from a few houses down, someone Daniel recognized. "Is he okay?" the neighbor asked, looking from Daniel to the officers. "We're just checking on a report," the first officer said. The neighbor frowned. "He's a good kid. Always polite. He cuts through our street almost every day on his way from practice." More pieces of the truth. More people who knew Daniel without him having to speak. The officers seemed to notice that the story they were piecing together didn't match the vague report they had been sent to investigate. They asked the neighbor a couple of quick questions, and the neighbor answered confidently, repeating that Daniel wasn't someone who caused problems. Daniel felt a little more relief. Still nervous, but relieved that others were helping clear things up. The officers thanked the neighbor, and the man walked off after giving Daniel a quick, supportive nod. "All right," the first officer said, exhaling a small breath. "It looks like everything checks out." Those words felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud. But before the moment could settle, the officer's radio buzzed, and he turned away slightly to listen. Daniel couldn't hear what was being said, but he noticed the officer's posture changed slightly, just a bit, nothing dramatic. The second officer glanced at the first. "Another call?" The first shook his head. "No, just asking for an update," he responded into the radio with a calm, professional tone. "Still checking, but looks like a misunderstanding. No issues here." Daniel watched quietly. He felt like he should be allowed to leave now, but he didn't want to move without being told. The officers returned their attention to him. "You're good to go," one of them said. "Thanks for your patience." Daniel let out a breath he had been holding for minutes. His shoulders finally loosened. "Okay," he said softly, but just as he reached down to pick up his backpack, he heard his name being called, loudly, urgently, carrying the kind of tone that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He turned. Someone familiar was hurrying toward him, someone who looked worried, someone who didn't. Yet no, the situation had almost calmed down. And the moment they arrived, everything shifted again. Daniel turned around quickly when he heard his name. His heart skipped, not from fear this time, but from the unexpected sound of a familiar voice cutting through the tense air. He saw his father rushing toward him from down the sidewalk, moving fast enough that it was clear he had come in a hurry. His face carried a mix of worry, confusion, something deeper, kind of protective, alarm that only a parent understood. Daniel didn't know how his father found out anything was happening. Maybe someone saw the flashing lights earlier and called him. Maybe a neighbor recognized Daniel and reached out. However it happened, his father was here now, and he looked like he had run the entire way. The officers noticed him too. They stepped slightly apart, not in a threatening way, but in a cautious and alert one, as anyone might do when a concerned parent shows up without knowing what's going on. Daniel's father reached the group. Breathing heavier than usual, his eyes locked on his son first, and then scanning the officers. "Trying to understand everything at once?" "Are you okay?" he asked Daniel immediately, placing a hand on his shoulder. Daniel nodded, though his voice took a moment to come out. "Yeah, I'm okay." His father looked him over quickly, almost doing a silent checklist. Was he hurt? Was he scared? Was he involved in something? Once he saw his son was physically fine, he turned to the officers. "What happened?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. It carried the kind of seriousness that made people listen. The first officer spoke calmly. "We got a call about someone matching his description near the store. We were checking to make sure everything was all right. Looks like it was just a misunderstanding." Daniel's father looked between them and his son again. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, as if he needed the word to make sense. The officer nodded. "Yes, sir. We were just finishing up. Everything's clear now. But even though the officer spoke with a steady tone, Daniel's father wasn't ready to relax. Parents didn't let fear go quickly, not when it involved their child. Not when they arrived and saw officers standing in front of them. Daniel could see the tension in his father's jaw. He recognized that look was the look of someone trying hard to stay calm, even when emotion pulled in the opposite direction. He stepped a little closer to his father. They were just asking questions. That's all. His father looked down at him. Did you tell them everything? Yeah, Daniel replied. I told them I came from practice. The cashier even came out and talked to them. Hearing this helped his father a little. He took a slow breath and then faced the officers again. I appreciate that you're doing your job, he said, still keeping his voice controlled. But someone calling in something vague shouldn't put my son in a stressful situation like this. The first officer listened and nodded respectfully. I understand, sir. The call didn't have much detail, but we had to check it out. We didn't assume anything. We were just trying to figure out what was going on. Daniel's father wasn't angry, just protective. His worry had come from imagining the worst before he arrived. Now that he was here, he needed to make sure nothing had gone too far. He lowered his voice a little, speaking more to the officers than to Daniel. I got a message saying police were questioning a teen near the store. When I heard it might be my son, he paused, steadying himself. I came as fast as I could. Daniel looked down at the ground. For some reason, he felt a sudden wave of embarrassment. Not because of his father, but because he hated being the reason someone had to rush, worry, or fear. He had only been walking home like any normal day. The second officer spoke this time. We understand why you're worried. We truly do. But everything checked out. There's no issue here. Daniel's father nodded slowly, his shoulders easing just slightly. Good, I'm glad he's okay. He turned back to Daniel. You sure you're all right? Yeah, Daniel said quietly. I'm fine. Just didn't expect any of this. His father put a hand on the back of Daniel's head briefly, in a comforting gesture that made Daniel feel grounded again. A soft silence settled over the group for a moment. Cars passed. Someone rode by on a bicycle, glancing once before continuing down the road. The world kept moving. Unaware of the small emotional storm happening on the sidewalk, one of the officers cleared his throat gently. We're going to head out now. Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. Daniel's father nodded. All right. The officers stepped back toward their patrol car. But before getting in, the first officer looked at Daniel and said, Take care, all right? Daniel nodded. You too. Then the officers got in the car and drove off, their presence slowly fading as they turned the corner and disappeared down the street. For the first time in what felt like a long while, Daniel could breathe normally again. His father watched the police car disappear, then let out a slow breath he had clearly been holding in since he arrived. When he finally turned to Daniel completely, the worry in his face softened into relief. Tell me exactly what happened, he said gently. Daniel picked up his backpack from the ground and held it close. I was just waiting for the bus. Then they pulled up and started asking questions because someone called about a suspicious teen. They didn't think I did anything, but it was just weird. I didn't know what to do. His father nodded, listening carefully. Did they treat you okay? Daniel shrugged. Yeah, they didn't yell or anything. They just didn't seem sure about me at first. I didn't want to move the wrong way. His father sighed and put a hand on Daniel's shoulder again. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I wish I got here sooner. Daniel shook his head. It's not your fault. His father looked him in the eyes for a moment, making sure there really were no signs of fear still lingering inside him. You did the right thing. Staying calm. Answering questions. Just remember you can always call me, no matter what. Daniel nodded. Hearing that helped more than he expected. They started walking away from the bus stop together. His father insisted on walking him home, even though Daniel said he didn't mind waiting for the bus. But his father wasn't taking any chances, not after what he had rushed into as they walked. Quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens after something emotional, where both people think at their own pace. After a minute, his father spoke. When I got that message, my heart dropped. I didn't know what was going on. I just ran out the door. Daniel looked up at him. Who told you? A neighbor, his father said. They saw the police near the store and thought it might be you. They called me right away. Daniel felt a small warmth in his chest. Knowing people in the neighborhood cared enough to look out for him, his father continued. I've always told myself I need to be ready for moments like this. You never know what someone might assume or misunderstand. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. Daniel swallowed lightly. I was scared for a second. Not because of what they said, just I didn't know how to act. It's normal, his father said. Not knowing what to do doesn't mean you did anything wrong. They walked past the bakery, the smell of fresh bread still drifting out the open door. Though Daniel barely noticed earlier when he walked by alone. This time, he noticed everything: the sounds of cars, the wind brushing past, the rhythm of his father's steps next to his. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. His father nodded. Anything, if he hadn't come. Do you think it still would have ended okay? His father took a moment before answering. It looked like they were close to clearing things up. The cashier helped. The neighbor helped. You did everything right. So yes, I think it would have been okay. But I'm still glad I got here. Daniel let out a small breath he didn't realize he was holding. After a moment, his father added, sometimes grown-ups misunderstand teenagers. Sometimes people make assumptions without meaning to. But what matters most is staying calm and speaking clearly, and having someone nearby who cares. Daniel looked up at him again. Thanks for coming, his father smiled softly. Always. When they reached the corner, Daniel decided to ask something he had been thinking since the officers left. Do you think the person who called the police actually thought I was doing something wrong? His father considered it. Maybe they were nervous, or mistaken. Or maybe they were having a rough day and made a quick judgment. It happens. People aren't perfect. Daniel nodded, even though he didn't fully understand how someone could misread something so simple. His father continued. But their mistakes shouldn't define your day. What matters is that you're safe and that you handled yourself with maturity. They walked a little farther before Daniel spoke again. Do you think it'll happen again? His father placed a gentle hand on Daniel's back. I hope not. But if it does, you won't face it alone. Remember that. The reassurance settled something inside Daniel, something that had been shaken earlier, now felt steadier. They reached home, and as they stepped inside, the tension from earlier slowly faded. Daniel set his backpack on the floor and let himself sink into the couch for a moment. Finally feeling the full wave of exhaustion from practice, the encounter, and the emotional rush of the afternoon, his father sat beside him and said, If you ever feel scared or unsure, tell me. We'll talk it through. You don't have to carry things alone. Daniel nodded. He felt safe again, grounded, like the world had tilted earlier, but was now slowly returning to balance. The moment that had spiraled from a misunderstanding was finally over. But Daniel knew he wouldn't forget it anytime soon. Not because it scared him, but because it reminded him how quickly things could change, and how important it was to have someone who stepped in when things felt wrong. And even though the afternoon had taken an unexpected turn, it ended with something steady and strong, the reassurance that he wasn't alone, and that the people who cared about him would show up when it mattered most. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around the house shifted in ways the teen couldn't fully understand. It's in the days leading up to the meeting at the station. The teen found himself thinking about small moments from the weeks before moments. He had overlooked at the time, but now felt heavier in his memory. Like the time he crossed the street and froze when a patrol car slowed down at the intersection. Or when he stopped himself from walking his usual route, home because he didn't want to pass by the same block where everything had happened. He didn't tell anyone about these things, not even his father. But they lingered quietly in the back of his mind. His father noticed small changes too. He noticed how the teen checked the window sometimes when he heard a siren, and how he looked away quickly when a police car passed by on the road. Even though the teen tried to act normal, a parent knows those tiny shifts. And while his father didn't want to bring attention to every reaction, he kept a gentle eye on him, always ready to step in if the teen needed reassurance. The night before the meeting, neither of them said much. They ate dinner together, cleaned up, and each drifted into their own thoughts. As the teen got ready for bed, he found his father standing by the living room window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The teen approached him slowly. "You think it'll be weird tomorrow?" he asked. His father turned with a soft smile. "Probably. But weird doesn't mean bad." Teen nodded and stood next to him. They didn't talk much more after that. They didn't have to. The next morning, the air outside felt cool and clear. The walk to the car was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The teen felt nervous, but he also felt grounded knowing his father was right there beside him. When they reached the station, it didn't look as intimidating as the teen had expected. It wasn't a huge building, and the entrance had big windows that let in a lot of light. A few people were coming and going, and the atmosphere felt more like an office than anything else. Still, his stomach tightened a little. Inside, the community liaison officer greeted them with a calm smile. She had warm eyes and a steady voice, and she didn't rush them. She guided them to a small meeting room with comfortable chairs and a round table. "Take your time," she said as they sat down. "We're here to talk, listen, and make things better moving forward." Those simple words made the teen breathe a little easier. After a moment, two officers came in both in uniform, but they carried themselves in a gentle, respectful way. They introduced themselves in a friendly tone, sitting across the table instead of standing. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room felt quiet but safe. Finally, the liaison officer began by explaining why the meeting was important, not to assign blame, not to dig into every detail, but to build understanding and trust. "We want to hear how that day felt for you," she said. "Only if you're comfortable sharing." The teen hesitated. His father gave him a small nod of encouragement. He took a slow breath. "It just happened too fast. I didn't know what was going on. I felt like I couldn't even explain myself." One of the officers leaned forward slightly, his voice calm. "I'm sorry you felt that way. That wasn't what we wanted. Sometimes officers act quickly because they're trying to keep situations safe, but hearing how it felt from your side helps us understand how we can communicate better." The teen listened closely. He appreciated that the officer didn't try to defend everything or dismiss his feelings. Instead, the officer acknowledged the emotional part of the experience, the part that had stayed with him the most. His father spoke up too. "I just want to make sure my son knows he's safe, and that communication goes both ways." That moment could have gotten heavier, even if no one meant for it to. The officers nodded. "You're right, and we appreciate you stepping in calmly." It made a difference. Hearing that made the teen look at his father with a mixture of surprise and deep gratitude. His father didn't show off or boast. He just listened quietly as the conversation continued. The officers explained what had happened from their perspective. They talked about training, about how fast decisions are sometimes made, and about why clear communication matters just as much as quick action. They weren't defensive. They were honest. The teen found himself slowly relaxing, not because everything suddenly made perfect sense, but because he felt seen and heard. This meeting wasn't about blame. It was about building something better. At one point, the liaison officer turned to him with a gentle expression. "What would help you feel safer in the future when interacting with officers?" The teen thought about it. Just being spoken to in a calm way? Being told what's happening instead of being rushed? "I think that would help me understand instead of panicking." "That's fair," one officer said with a nod. "And it's something we can absolutely work on." The meeting lasted a little over an hour, but it didn't feel long. It felt necessary. When it was over, everyone stood and exchanged quiet thanks. As the teen and his father walked out of the station, the sun felt brighter. He felt lighter. On the car ride home, the teen gazed out the window. "I'm glad we went," he said softly. His father smiled. "Me too. You handled it well." The teen didn't say anything at first. He looked down at his hands, then back out the window. "I think talking about it made it easier to breathe," he admitted. "That's how healing starts," his father replied. The next few days felt different. The heaviness that had been sitting inside the teen began to fade. He found himself walking his usual route again without feeling tense. When he saw a police car pass by, he didn't flinch quite as much. The world didn't suddenly become perfect. And he didn't forget what happened, but he no longer felt trapped by the memory. One evening, while he and his father were sitting in the living room, his father turned to him and said, "You know, I'm proud of how you've handled everything. You didn't run from the hard part." The teen felt warmth spread through his chest. "I didn't do it alone," he said quietly. His father nodded with a small, touched smile. That's what family is for. Over the next week, life began to feel normal again. School felt easier. He laughed with his friends more. He slept better. His father seemed more relaxed too, knowing his son was finding his balance again. But something else happened too. Something the teen didn't expect. The situation became a bridge between him and his father. They talked more openly now. They shared thoughts they never would have said before. Difficult moments had brought them closer, not through fear, but through trust. One Saturday morning, they walked together to a small local cafe. They sat by the window, sipping warm drinks. "Do you ever think about that day now?" his father asked gently. The teen nodded. "Sometimes, but it doesn't bother me the same way. I think talking helped. And knowing they cared enough to listen helped too." His father gave a slow nod. "Good, and if you ever need to talk again, you don't have to wait. I'm here." The teen smiled. "I know." He looked out the window at the calm street, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The world seemed less frightening than it had a few weeks ago. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave him something stronger: understanding, connection, and the sense that he had people who would stand with him through anything, and that, he realized, was what truly made him feel safe again. In the days that followed the meeting at the station, life settled into a calmer rhythm. The teen felt more like himself again. The fear that once sat just beneath the surface now felt distant, like a shadow that had finally stepped away from him. But even though things felt better, he knew the journey wasn't completely finished. He still had moments where the memory tugged at him quiet, reminders of a day that had changed him more than he expected. One afternoon, he was sitting on the front steps of the house, letting the warm sun rest on his face. The street was calm, and the sound of birds filled the air. His father came out and sat beside him without saying anything at first. They had grown comfortable with the kind of silence that didn't need filling. "You've been doing better?" his father eventually said. "I can see it." The teen nodded. "Yeah, I feel different, lighter." His father leaned back slightly, stretching his legs. "You've come a long way in a short time. I'm proud of you." Hearing those words never got old. They carried warmth that settled deep inside him. They talked about smaller things after that: school, friends, random thoughts, but beneath it all was something unspoken. Something they both felt. They had gotten through something together, and that bond was stronger now. A few days later, the teen experienced something he hadn't expected. As he walked home from school, he saw a patrol car parked near a small store on the corner. Two officers were talking with the store owner. For a moment, he felt the familiar hesitation rise up inside him. His steps slowed. But then he remembered the meeting, the conversation, the understanding he had gained. He took a quiet breath and kept walking. To his surprise, one of the officers noticed him and gave a small nod. Not a stare, not a frown, just a simple gesture of acknowledgement. It was enough to make him feel grounded. He nodded back and continued on. That small moment stayed with him for the rest of the day. It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was just a reminder that the world held different kinds of moments, not only difficult ones. When he told his father about it later that evening, his father listened closely, a calm expression on his face. "That's a good step," his father said. "Not because of what they did, but because of how you felt." The teen nodded. "Yeah, I didn't feel scared, just aware." His father smiled. "That's growth." Over the next few weeks, the teen noticed that he wasn't avoiding anything anymore. He walked his usual routes. He hung out with friends without feeling distracted. He even started volunteering at the community center his father often visited. He wanted to do something meaningful, something that wasn't about fear, but about helping others. On his first day at the center, he helped organize books, clean tables, and assist younger kids with simple activities. It felt good. Really good. Being able to give his time to something positive made him feel connected to the community in a way he hadn't felt before. One of the staff members, a friendly man who had worked at the center for years, approached him during a break. "You're a natural with these kids," he said with an approving smile. The teen shrugged, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I just like helping. It's a good reason," the man replied. As the weeks passed, volunteering became part of his routine. He began to look forward to the afternoons he spent there. It gave him purpose and kept him grounded, but the biggest change wasn't in how he spent his time, it was in how he saw the world. He realized that one bad encounter didn't define every experience. One hard moment didn't erase all the good ones. And most importantly, he learned that facing something difficult didn't weaken him, made him stronger. His father noticed these changes too. One evening, after dinner, they sat at the kitchen table, enjoying a quiet moment. "You're growing," his father said thoughtfully. "Not just getting older, growing." The teen smiled softly. "I feel it." His father looked at him with calm pride. It takes courage to face fear and still move forward. A lot of people hide from moments like that, but you didn't. The teen lowered his eyes for a second, feeling a warmth he couldn't fully describe. "I didn't want to be scared all the time," he said, "and I didn't want you to worry." His father reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "Worrying is part of being a parent, but seeing you become stronger eases that worry." They shared a warm silence, a silence filled with understanding. A few days later, something unexpected happened at school. His teacher, the one who had once pulled him aside and offered support, asked if he would be willing to talk to a small group of students about handling difficult situations. She explained that the group often discussed emotional challenges, and hearing from someone who had been through something tough without sharing personal details he wasn't comfortable with could help them. At first, the teen hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted to open up, even in a general way. But later that night, when he told his father about it, his father said, "Sometimes sharing a little of your strength helps someone else find theirs." Oh. The teen thought about that. And the next day, he told his teacher he would do it. On the afternoon of the meeting, he sat with 6 other students in a small, quiet classroom. They weren't strangers, but they weren't close friends either. They were simply kids trying to navigate their own challenges. He didn't go into every detail. He didn't want to relive the whole experience. Instead, he talked about fear, confusion, how important it was to talk to someone you trust. "I learned that hiding things only makes them heavier," he said. "Talking about it helped me breathe again. And knowing someone had my back helped even more." The group listened quietly. Some nodded. Some looked thoughtful. By the time he finished, he felt a sense of relief, like he had let go of something he didn't even realize he was still carrying. After the meeting, one of the students approached him and said, "Thanks. I really needed to hear that." He walked home that day feeling proud of himself, not for being brave in the moment of the encounter, but for choosing to grow from it. Later that evening, he and his father sat outside together as the sun set. The sky was painted with shades of orange and gold. "You've changed," his father said softly, watching him with thoughtful eyes, in a good way. The teen asked. "In the best way," his father replied. "You're standing taller now. Not because you're older, but because you understand yourself more." The teen felt a deep peace settle in his chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," his father smiled. "That's what we do for each other. We show up." The teen looked out at the street, calm and familiar. The fear that once controlled him had faded into the background. It didn't disappear completely, but it no longer defined him. What replaced it was confidence, a quiet confidence built from experience, support, and understanding. As the evening grew darker, the teen thought about everything he had been through. The scary moment, the confusion, the meeting at the station, the conversations with his father, the small steps forward, and the big ones too. All of it had shaped him. He realized something powerful. Some moments in life change you, but you get to choose how they change you. He chose to grow. He chose to understand. He chose to keep moving. And he chose to trust that he was stronger than he once believed, with his father by his side. He felt ready for whatever came next because he knew he wasn't facing the world alone, and that simple truth made all the difference.